It is 9:33. I am Rob Johnson, the chair of the Transportation Policy Board. Welcome to our May 10th, 2018 meeting. We've got a good agenda today. We're going to be approving some contingency funds from the FHWA process. Have an alumnus back to talk to us about the State Facilities Action Plan, which I know will generate a lot of conversation around the table about the connective tissue between the state facilities that run through many of our jurisdictions and how we can continue to work with the state on additional funding that might be needed for maintenance of those facilities. And then we'll also have an update from Ben Bekenta to talk about the Vision 2050 plan. Why don't we go around the table and do some brief introductions, and then we'll call on those folks on the phone, and then we'll get started. I'll start with you, if you don't mind, Mayor Lucas.
Thank you. I'm Mayor Ron Lucas from the town of Steilacoom, and I represent other cities and towns, Pierce County.
Terry Ryan, Snohomish County Council, representing Community Transit.
Deborah Nelson, Arlington City Council, and other Snohomish County cities.
Jesse Hamishima, Pierce County staff, representing the Regional Staff Committee.
Davina Dewar, Deputy Mayor of Bothell, representing Snohomish County, SCA, sorry, wrong hat today.
Jennifer Robertson, Bellevue City Council, representing City of Bellevue.
Mia Gregerson, 33rd representative.
Kate Cruller, City of Tukwila, a City Council member, and also representing SCA in 38 cities.
Dana Ralph, Mayor of Kent, representing other cities and towns in King County.
Kelly McGurdy, your PSRC staff.
Craig Kenworthy, Puget Sound Clean Air Agency.
Joe McDermott, King County Council, representing Metro Transit, took the 56 here today.
Russ Blunt, Fife staff, representing Regional Project Evaluation Committee.
Doug DeForest, representing the Thurston Regional Planning Council.
Dave Ramsey with Transportation Improvement Board.
Trinity Parker with Sound Transit, representing Transportation Operators Committee.
Carla Chavez, Transportation Choices Coalition.
Beck Ashby, Port Orchard City Council, representing other cities, Kitsap.
Good morning, Kevin Gorman, representing the City of Bremerton.
And I think we've got several folks on the line. Councilmember Doug Richardson, are you there? How about Councilmember Stephanie Wright?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Good morning. Councilmember John Clausen? How about Dan Ganchett from the FMCIB?
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning, Dan. Councilmember Ryan Mello?
Good morning, and I represent Pierce Transit here at the Transportation Policy Board.
Good morning. Councilmember Paul Roberts?
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Ann Eskridge, are you on the line?
I am on the line, University of Washington.
Good morning, Ann. Is there anybody else on the phone that I've missed? And welcome, Board Member Trask. Nice to have you this morning. Let's move on to agenda item number 3, and that is the public comment. While we await the sign-in sheet of public comment, why don't I just take the liberty of filibustering for a quick minute and say we've got a couple of board members who are new to this board but are not here today. But in case you run into them out in the wild, say congratulations to Tacoma Councilmember Chris Beal and Councilmember Justin Camarda, who are our new members and alternates from Tacoma. Bainbridge Island Councilmember Matthew Turman and Kelsey Mesher, the alternate for Transportation Choices. Commissioner Don Johnson is also no longer going to be serving on the board representing the Port of Tacoma, though he couldn't be here with us. Those of you who've been at this table for a while know that Councilmember Johnson has been, Commissioner Johnson has been with us for, I think, 7 or 8 years. So that's a long time service. We'll wish him well. So there are 2 folks who've signed up for public comment this morning, Alex Zimmerman and then Paul W. Locke. Mr. Zimmerman, please come forward.
Hi, my dirty AA Führer, a Nazi social democratic mafia with progressive Gestapo principle. My name Alex Zimmerman and I'm president of Stand Up America.
Ice broken. Last week, people in Ballard recall Seattle Council. 1,000 and 1,000 people sign a petition, and all is newspaper right now. It's a very unique situation. Why this happened? It's exactly what as I told you. For many years, 1,600 times, what as I got only to council chamber. Fascism cannot be forever. You guys, pardon, I call you many times, natural born degenerate idiot. How in America you can bring a million and million people to pure fascism? How is this possible, huh? Who can explain to me? And why you all identical, like a freaking real idiot from mental institution? So people tired from you, and I told you 1,000 times about this. 20th century show, fascism cannot go forever. Is this exactly what has happened right now? Is this only beginning? Because you never presented this meeting. First time for 30 years, I feel, see very angry 1,000 in 1,000 white people. Yes, white is very important. So, guys, when you don't stop and you don't change who you are, you stop and acting like a freaking idiot, like a ricketeer, like a bandito, you know what it means? And killer, it will be worse. It's only beginning. History shows this 1,000 times. So right now I speak to everybody who listen to me. Stand up, America. Stand up, Washingtonian. We need clean this dirty chamber from this crook. So suck blood and money from us. $1 billion and $1 billion. Thank you, motherfucker.
Excuse me, Mr. Zimmerman. That kind of language won't be tolerated here. Mr. Luck? Mr. Zimmerman, if you continue to be disruptive, I'll ask you to be removed. Mr. Luck?
I'm Paul W. Luck. Union contracts is costing us a fortune. The people who work for the public should not have to be joining unions. What are you going to do about it? It's driving up the cost of all the projects. The projects are being driven up by union contracts. We shouldn't have them for public employees. It is only there to help our elected officials as it stands right now. It doesn't help the public who's paying the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Locke. That concludes the folks that have signed up to give public comment, so let's move on to agenda item number 4, Kelly McGurty and our staff report.
Thank you. Good morning. Just a couple of notes. I would draw your attention to the agenda packet. We have a save the date for our General Assembly, which is on May 31st, and the registration information is included on the agenda cover. We hope you will join us. And also to note that the Executive Board did unanimously recommend adoption of the Regional Transportation Plan. So we're looking forward to General Assembly. And my only other comment is I would point your attention to the information item, and I'll be talking about this a little bit greater detail when I talk about the action item under agenda item number 6, but just a quick reminder that under our adopted project tracking policies, projects that are awarded PSRC's Federal Highway Administration dollars are given a fairly strict deadline, but they do have an opportunity to request an extension, and through the process we provide that information to the board. We will do this once a year, and so the information item does include those projects that are requesting extensions for 2018. They have until the end of this year, and I'll elaborate a little bit more in my remarks under agenda item number 6. And with that, my comments are concluded. Thank you.
Any questions for Kelly? I'm not seeing any. So agenda item number 5 is our consent agenda, which only includes the minutes of our April 12th meeting. Would anyone like to remove that item from the agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's nice to have you guys this morning. Welcome. Good morning. I'm going to call that Councilmember Robinson with the second and Councilmember Ryan with the first. So further discussion on that topic, folks? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great. Consent agenda is adopted. Let's move on to agenda item number 6 and talk about FHWA contingency funds.
All right, thank you. So as I mentioned, faster than I thought would happen, we just talked about the rebalancing and our project obligation extensions. And I wanted to just touch on this before we get to the contingency, because under our new situation, these really are intertwined processes. And so just a couple of reminders. As of last year, we are now pretty strictly programmed our awards each year when we go through project selection. So for example, in 2016, we actually awarded 2018, 19, and $20. And our new kind of environment, because we are caught up with all of our old funds on the books, is that we are balanced each year to estimated available amounts. And we knew that one of the consequences of that was that we would have to be a little bit more nimble when we do have project adjustments. You may also remember every year we now have a delivery target that for our highway funds that we must meet, or we would be at risk of losing our federal funds, and I'll guarantee you that we are not going to let that happen. But in order to meet that annual delivery target under this new system, we're going to have to rebalance every year. And the rebalancing will be required due to projects that are delayed and requesting extensions as the items in the information item, but also due to funds being returned. And when they're returned, they are now impacting our current year's target. So for 2018, we do have 9 projects that have requested extensions. That totals about $14 million. I will share with you that 9 projects is a lot less than we've seen in prior cycles. So I think that's a good thing. Everyone is really adhering to the timelines that they have provided when they're awarded the funds. In addition to those extensions, and along with some return funds that have come back to the region, our target has been increased by about $24 million for 2018. And in order to meet that target, we need to go through an advancement process to move projects in the later years forward. So we are working on that right now. I will tell you it's been a bit of a challenge because we just don't have as many immediately ready to go projects as we have had perhaps in the past. But we are working hard to do that. We're very, very close, and we do believe that we're going to be able to accomplish that and meet our target. The state has an August 1st delivery target. You may also remember in prior years we had to take an emergency funding action to make that happen and to meet our target, and we are working very, very hard with all of our sponsors to no longer have to do that. So I wanted to kind of provide that introduction and introduce the information item, and the reason that I'm bringing it up for the contingency is because of how this process is now working. So per the information in the agenda packet, we do have funds available for distribution to our adopted contingency list. This does include those return funds as well as some additional 2020 dollars. As we've gone through the process, we work on estimates, and when our final allocations come in, we are afforded an adjustment. But with this new system where we're very tightly awarded per year, and with the advent of the delivery targets, we have a bit of a cascading process. So I mentioned earlier when funds are returned from projects, and they could be returned when projects are canceled or when they simply have efficiencies and they don't need as much of the federal dollars as they originally anticipated. Those returned funds are added to the current year's delivery target. Given the time frame and the need to meet that target, what we do is we advance funds from the subsequent year, so in this case from 2019 forward, and that cascading process ultimately frees up funds in the later year of the TIP. And so that's why the action in front of you today is to award 2020 dollars to our adopted contingency list. It's a fairly healthy amount. $27.5 million is available for distribution. We've gone through our Regional Project Evaluation Committee and the 4 countywide forums, and they are recommending the projects that are included in the agenda packet. And this is the action. We're asking for recommendation of those projects to receive the contingency funds, but I would be happy to answer any questions on the process or any of the projects.
Anybody on the phone? I'm not seeing any table tents go up here in the room. Anybody on the phone have any questions that they'd like to ask of Kelly? I mean, the takeaway for me, Kelly, here is that our process is working. We've been asking project sponsors to bring us projects when they really are ready to go, and that when they're not ready to go, that they sort of get back in the queue and other projects that are ready to go move forward. So this action seems consistent with our newer protocols, and given the fact that there's not a lot of discussion around here means that we must be doing a good job of keeping staff in the loop. There you go. Filibustering works. Councilmember Balducci, go ahead.
I just have a comment. I ran into former Tukwila Councilmember Pam Carter the other day, and I just wanted to remind us that we have a contingency list because of her. This was her idea a little over 10 years ago, and so it was ahead of its time, and we're really glad we have it now. So I just thought we'd acknowledge her.
Yeah. Someone on the phone?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Paul Roberts, just a quick comment. Appreciate this process, and just appreciate Claudia's comment, because I think this is a very good way of doing business to make sure that we're getting the dollars to where they can do some good. And I also appreciate that the CMAQ list has a pretty high focus on reducing emissions and improving air quality. And I don't know, Craig Kenworthy, I know he's there, he may have a comment, but I just want to say how much I appreciate that work. Thank you.
He was nodding his head affirmatively to your statement, but nodded his head negatively when he said he had nothing else to add. So this item does require an action, and you've got that action in front of you. Yes, Councilmember.
I move that the Transportation Policy Board recommend that the Executive Board approve the distribution of the 2020 contingency funding.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Nelson. Any further discussion, folks? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, Kelly. Let's bring back alumnus Robin Mayhew to talk about the State Facilities Action Plan. Welcome. Nice to have a dynamic duo back in front of us again.
Thank you. It's great to see you all as well. And thanks for the opportunity to talk about the I-5 system partnership. I think I'm going to get an opportunity to come back on a more regular basis and give you reports on the work. Also, I'm going to start by inviting you all to attend, and I'm going to conclude by inviting you all to attend. But today, just briefly wanted to talk a little bit about our approach and then the specific work we're doing this year. And we're looking at this as a longer-term project, not just a one-year effort. But first of all, not that you need to be reminded, but that I-5 serves as the backbone, really, for our region, as well as the Thurston Regional Planning Council. And so our focus is to concentrate from all the way down in Tumwater, all the way up to Marysville, and look at the larger issues and develop a vision statement that can be brought into a planning process. And I'm going to go through the details of this slide in a minute. But we see challenges and opportunities in the process. First of all, in terms of challenges, we all know about traffic congestion and can point to a number of locations. We have two of the biggest congested locations in the entire state on this stretch. Also, the fact that our facility is deteriorating. We have a lot of work to do in terms of bridges and pavement condition. And then also that there's an unstable funding mechanism in place. We have a lot of work to do there. There's been a lot of great conversation focused in the long range about that, but we need to make it happen. So, okay, let's talk a more positive message. There are opportunities. So a visioning discussion lets us think about emerging technologies, the fact that our society is changing, and we can work towards an evolution of what I-5 does to serve our communities, our freight and people movement in this entire stretch. To support both our communities and our economy. And I just want to keep reinforcing that it is, in fact, more than just a facility. It's the backbone. It connects to a number of different systems throughout that entire area I described. We also are concerned about the performance of the HOV system. As we grow, we need to eke out every bit of performance we can get in the system. So that's going to be also a focus of this, even though it's called I-5, it has that in the name. We put the word system in there for a reason, because it's bigger than just the I-5 facility infrastructure. And we have an approach at WSDOT called Practical Solutions. You may have heard about it, but really it's the way we're doing everything these days. And it's looking at state of good repair, safety, operational improvements, demand management, and then capacity adds in that order or close to that order, looking for things that we can do at the right time in the right place with the lowest costs, but also get to the community's desired outcomes. So this year, and that's where I'll get to this slide, we're working in two different ways. And if you're a linear thinker, this might seem a little confusing, so I just want to stop for a minute and say, we know there's problems today. So the state facilities action plan work that we did as part of the long-range plan update identified that we needed to do some things now. And WSDOT agrees, and WSDOT has been doing some work for the last year to identify near-term solutions that are operational and demand management. We've been doing that not in isolation, but in fact partnership with a number of folks. There's some people around the table and in the audience that actually have been participating in the I-5 system partnership discussions, and there was a lot more detail at the last conversation about near-term solutions, things that transit agencies can do, as well as WSDOT and other partners, to make I-5 and other related facilities work better. And that might be a first and last mile investment by a transit agency to take more trips to basically reduce demand on the facility and other associated facilities, or hard shoulder running, or ramp metering. So we have a list of things, and there was a very long list that was narrowed down to a shorter list of things that we believe that can happen in 0 to 4 years to start reducing the problem now. I'm not saying it's going to fix the problem. I'm not here today to propose that at any means. We know that the challenge will continue. But we also are looking, so the map that's on the left-hand side shows the current pilot studies in green, and then potential areas. We really want to do a study of the entire corridor, Tumwater to Marysville. So we're going to be continuing to look for funds to do that second round of pilots. But meanwhile, we know that we need, as I mentioned at the beginning, to do a longer range look at I-5. And so we have a visioning conversation that's underway, and we're meeting here in this very room the third Tuesday from 9 to 11, and we're planning to do so until February or March of next year. And from that, we plan to have a vision statement that will help us develop scenarios. And the next phase of this work, we envision it being 2 to 3 years in time to help us flesh out scenarios and look at financial strategy issues, public engagement issues, what's evolving in terms of what people want. There's some good work that the Vision 2050 update is bringing out in terms of what are priorities, and work towards a preferred alternative. From that, we want to develop a strategic plan, and the reason that we're calling it a strategic plan instead of just a master plan, which it will certainly include, is that we see a master plan as more addressing physical challenges on the facility, and we certainly need to get to that place, but we also know that there's going to be policy issues, implementation, and programmatic things that are beyond just doing physical infrastructure changes that might have to do with demand management and other things I mentioned earlier. So this would be a way to navigate us through that process. So it's going to take a few years to get us to the place where we're actually doing this massive change, but if we could have the commitment of transit agencies and cities and counties, freight community, and we've had a group meeting that in the last few meetings we've had over 70 folks that have participated in one way or another, so we're engaging, but we continue to open the table up. And again, if you're a community that isn't right along I-5, like our chair mentioned, that is not meaning that you shouldn't come to the table. So with that, I'll wrap it up.
So I'm actually going to transition to start talking about the local priority state route. So maybe I'll just pause to see if there are any I-5 specific questions for Robin. Okay. So we've been scheming a little bit. The plan's not quite yet adopted, but we're excited to get started. So we have a concept to put in front of you today that we'd like your feedback on. having to do with the local priority state routes component of the state facilities action plan in the draft long range plan. As Robin mentioned, this was requested by this body of the state to include this, and we've been working together to think about what this looks like. And as I mentioned, we want to kind of put this high level concept out to you. We have new data now that we've not had before, and so our preliminary concept is simply to review that existing data for every corridor. We have current projects through our transportation improvement program. We have planned projects through the long-range transportation plan, kind of overlay that on the existing conditions data, and really look at, do an analysis of what those remaining issues are and engage with stakeholders. And the purpose is really to get in front of these issues and queue up for the next plan update. And I would note that we're planning on doing a similar exercise, and Ben's going to talk about Vision 2050 in just a moment, but we have our transportation network out to 2040. We are planning for growth out to 2050. What we want to do as part of that process is to identify some of the transportation, hotspots, so to speak, coming out of that work so that, again, we can queue up those good discussions for the next transportation plan update. Whoops. So I just want to walk through, pay no attention to the location of the map. It's completely anonymous. But we wanted to just walk through some example data and show you kind of what we were thinking. So first and foremost, we now have access to more precise travel time data for every segment of the National Highway System in our region. And this is showing kind of our interpretation of moderate to severe congestion in the peak period today. It's very current data. Is coming out much more frequently than 2016, 2015 data. And just a note, I don't know if Sean's in the back of the room. I think we've determined that the National Highway System, which is not just the state routes but also principal arterials, in our region we think that's about 30% of the total in the state, just to kind of give that context. So starting with what do we know is happening on the system today. I mentioned we have currently funded transportation projects. So taking a look at what are those transportation projects that are funded and underway or soon to be underway within those corridors. We know that just in this example, anonymous example area, we know that a lot of those projects cover those areas that we saw on the prior map that show congestion, and it covers a wide range of types of projects. It could be roadway capacity, bicycle pedestrian improvements, transit, demand management, as well as preservation and maintenance, which certainly has a nexus to some of the congestion issues that we see. From the long-range transportation plan, we also know that we have a regional integrated transit network with frequent transit service coming, and the purple is that planned frequent transit service, which is defined as operating at least 16 hours a day at 15 minutes or less frequency. It does cover quite a large swath of the corridors that we're looking at. And just a note that we've also noticed that many of the funded transportation projects that we see through our transportation improvement program are providing supportive elements to support that future frequent transit service. We also thought let's look at those planned projects that are in the regional transportation plan that are providing capacity. And again, there is a lot of overlap with those current areas of congestion that we see today. And again, many of these provide capacity or operational improvements to help support all modes, but specifically that frequent transit service. And the one thing I want to note is that what we don't have yet in these example slides is we're not showing the impact on congestion of these projects, but we think the other data that might be useful as we go through that exercise is to look at the plan's performance output to see what is the effect or the planned effect of those projects on those areas of current congestion. We can also look at demographic data, bridge conditions, housing and employment, permitting data. We can look at pavement conditions. So there's a lot of data that we can look at, and we think that that's a strong place to start when we're looking at the needs of these local priority state routes and the corridors that surround them. So our proposal basically is to get your feedback on, does that seem like a logical approach? Robin and my teams, we're going to continue to work on this. With the point being is that we want to identify those areas of need and potential future investment. Where are the gaps that we're seeing? Queue it up for the next long-range transportation plan. Our vision at this point, our preliminary vision, is that once we go through that exercise for all of those corridors, we would bring back that data to you and get your feedback at that point. But we want to build off, and I'm going to turn it over to Robin again in a moment to talk about this, but the work that she just described on the I-5 system partnership the name change, system partnership, as well as some corridor sketch initiatives that WSDOT has been going through. We think that this is a good opportunity to build off of that with all of the data that we have here, potentially convening some stakeholders in those most impacted areas where we are still seeing gaps and issues, again, queuing up for the next update. And I did mention as well, we're going to go through a similar process for Vision 2050, is really identifying where, with all of the growth, once we have those growth scenarios, where are we seeing some of the issues and identifying that. But maybe, Robin, I'll ask you if there's anything you want to elaborate on the WSDOT component.
Robin, do you mind if we pause for a quick second? Board Member Trask has a question.
I guess and I don't have these at the top of my, just in thinking I guess the overarching goals for Vision 2040 or thinking about 2050. I guess my question is why is congestion drawn out or prioritized in this analysis versus other potential transportation goals? And because I feel like that really skews the analysis and what we're looking at as opposed to potentially safety issues, health issues, maintenance and preservation issues otherwise, and we'll get a very specific outcome, which I don't know if that totally aligns with the goals that we've set out through this exercise.
I think that's a great point, and I think we're just providing example data. In our mind, it seemed very logical to start with current conditions, and this was just one example of really current data that we have. But again, looking back, there's a lot of other data that we can pull out. You mentioned safety. We still have challenges in terms of actually being able to publicly map individual locations. We can do that by block group, I think. So I think that's a great comment, and we weren't saying it's necessarily focused on congestion. It's just one of those data sets that we happen to have really current, strong data, but then looking at all these other data sources. And again, this is in concept. Go ahead.
I just want to add to that an example. So what's really kind of cool here is that this is new in terms of WSDOT and PSRC and all the communities trying to say, for real, this is our plan, is your plan, and we're trying to get more consistency in performance metrics. And an example of that would be SR 305. It was one of the Connecting Washington projects. Work's underway, the Olympic region and a number of communities, transit agencies in Kitsap County, Kitsap Transit, Paulsbo, the stretches from Paulsbo to the ferry dock, and the issues that came up and were identified were safety and mobility and how that impacts the economic vitality of that entire 11-point-something miles. And so the process that's underway, WSDOT has been kicking this off for a while now, pulling a lot of data together, and Kelly just gave you a glimpse of some of it. It's kind of overwhelming, but it's based in land use planning and what the communities want and what the purpose and need is, and developing a set of priorities together or a corridor vision, identifying performance expectations and what's working well, and identifying community concerns and things that have already emerged in past projects. So I would say that it is the process is flexible and has the prioritization doesn't need to just be on something such as mobility.
A follow-up, Board Member Trask?
Can I just ask then, how can these slides change or the kind of composition so it's not just about supply ostensibly for SOVs, but it gets to what would be the next steps as PSRC is exploring this to kind of, I guess, expand, not necessarily exclude, but expand beyond this, what looks like a great starting point?
Sure. And I think, we're kind of in the concept, and I wanted to make sure I got this body's feedback before I got too far ahead of myself. So this is great feedback, not just focusing on that one element, but gathering as much data as we can. And what we could do, perhaps, is rather than us doing that for every corridor, we do it for a handful and come back with a more complete set and gather feedback before we take any additional steps.
Board Member DeForest?
I just simply want to add to this. We really appreciate the fact that we're included in it. She said Tumwater, and that's down in our area. And so we're very much involved in it, very much supportive of the efforts that are being started, and look forward to participating. We, of course, have a certain amount of data that deals with the southern end of the problem. But just from a day-to-day toward the accident, I've been coming up here for about 5 or 6 years now, And last year was the first year that we really started getting traffic jams starting at Lacey and going up to Mounts Road through the whole Nisqually building. And so that it's evidence of just the problem that, you know, your success in doing things up here has meant there's more and more people headed that way to live. And we're here seeing the repercussions in the traffic that is generating now is just one sign of that growth that's hitting all of us and coming down our way. So we look forward to working with you, and thank you for being included.
Thank you. Councilmember Dorr.
So I wanted to ask, in relation to getting the light rail spine built on I-5 up to Everett, what sort of impact do you see on your work with the I-5 solutions? And then how does that kind of telegraph into the regional networks and the other traffic around that area?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's precisely what we want to understand better, is what's happening today, plus what's going to be happening maybe in increments of every 5 years in terms of investments, as well as travel changes, origin destination studies. And that's the idea, is to look for ways to move as much people and goods, but also look at ways to reduce demand. And so right now we're in a vision phase of the planning work. So when we move further into the inventory of what's out there and when things will be built and brought on board, we'll be bringing that into the modeling work that we do, and I would imagine that will be part of the next phase.
Mr. Hamashima.
Chairman, Paul Roberts, when I'm in the queue.
We'll put you following Mr. Hamashima, Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I think it's a great idea that you have a convergence of agencies doing this study, because in the past, obviously, what would happen is that PSRC would do its analysis, make its plans, and then somehow the state would have an effort later or before that would be the statewide system plan, which hasn't been done for a while, I guess, as well. The question I was thinking about, Mr. Trask point he had made about the presentation itself, and I think he is a bit concerned about the fact that it looks at all issues of highway capacity and delay for the SOV user in itself. But I pretty much understood from the beginning of this discussion that it's more than just about vehicles on the freeway system itself, but they're looking at various levels of our system, going from freeways to arterials as well in the state system. And that's something that more in terms of integrating as to how transportation demand management works and the interface between transit as well as our highways, because clearly the I-5 discussion is not about widening I-5. Secretary Millar made that very clear. Unless we could all break out our credit cards and pay for that extra lane, it's not going to happen. So it's probably going to be something closer to operational improvements and transportation demand management discussion, which comes closer to, I think, what Mr. Trask was suggesting as well. But I guess my question about this, however, is that I'm not sure as to how does this fit into the implementation itself? Because WSDOT would, the last time around in terms of the state legislative package is that we were able to have some significant projects, among them the Gateway project, funded in itself. What does WSDOT see in terms of what's a logical progression of order in terms of, a study like this comes out in itself? Are there prioritized projects in a list that will come out that would be recommended as something to be funded, or is it more so just a menu of projects that should be for further consideration by all bodies?
So I think that may be more than just my answer, but I think what we've talked about is that our plan is your plan, and that means that means that we're all working together to get to some list, and it's driven by performance. So it's a performance-based driven planning process that we all are at the table, and we all have. It's not just WSDOT's problem. I'm channeling Secretary Millar right now, because we aren't the only ones that utilize that facility and all the connected facilities every single day. It's our communities. It's our economic backbone. And so I think what we're striving for, both in the near-term effort as well as the long-term, is, and I know we're toggling between what Kelly wanted to talk about today and this I-5 work, but on the I-5 stuff is that we come up with a joint vision and carry that all the way through to a joint set of investments that might mean investments in local infrastructure that help support the travel shed, if you will, not necessarily all just about I-5. And looking at programs that help communities, maybe there's satellite stations where businesses are putting facilities so people don't actually have to take that long commute, and helping that job housing balance kind of thing. There's a whole bunch of things that could be on the table here, and that's the way our agency is looking to work with you all.
I guess I would add that your comment has been repeated around the state at all of our brethren MPOs and RTPOs with that same concern about how things have happened in the past. And so there has been a movement. It does feel like there's a kind of a new era of WSDOT working with the local agencies, and that is the goal, is that we'll work together on these issues and these projects and come up with one coordinated joint list of investments that can then be pushed forward. That might sound a little naive in whether or not we can actually get there, but I think, you know, everyone is sincere in wanting to work towards that. And I think there's also the recognition, as you all know, when you're creating your legislative agendas, speaking with one voice is very powerful and much more effective. And I think that's the vision for this. And I know that Secretary Millar has certainly been supportive of that. So that would be the hope, I think, whether we're talking about the I-5 system partnership and the ultimate list of investments that's endorsed, as well as the state routes, is that we're all in agreement that this is the right investment at this location, and let's work together to get it funded. I'm still new to the, you know.
I'll just remind you all that the direction when the state facilities of local interest, that was kind of an add-on to the work we were doing with the State Facilities Action Plan, and you all said, well, what about all the things that didn't get funded in Connecting Washington, and what's the process, and how are you working together so it's something that makes sense from a performance-based process? Not saying it's going to have every answer at the end of the day, but hopefully it helps inform decisions.
Councilmember Roberts, thanks for your patience.
No, thank you. Great discussion, Mr. Chair. Thank you. You know, I do appear as being on this committee, but I apologize if, you know, it has been meeting at a time that I have some standing commitments otherwise. So I've been trying to track it. So this has been really helpful discussion. But I wanted to identify a point for that I hope we, or the committee, will be able to focus on in the near term. And it may be illustrative of other places in the system that need sort of that extra focus. And the point being that in 2024, Sound Transit will open up the Linwood station connection to Linwood. And when that happens, it has the potential to change the dynamic on moving people from, for instance, Everett to Linwood, but from a lot of places in Snohomish County to Linwood, as that will then become the northern portal in that point for the Sound Transit system. And so community transit buses, other BRT lines with Sound Transit and so on will converge there. It seems that there may be some opportunities there to do some improvements on the state system, not only I-5, but other systems that feed into that area. And I suspect that's not the only place where that may be happening. And thinking now about what those opportunities are to improve the system and trying to put any capital needs on the agenda for 2019 legislative session, seems like there's some opportunities there, and I would hate to see us miss them. So if you covered that, I apologize being on the phone here, but I just think that may be a target of opportunity, and I suspect there are others like that in the system, and some discussion in the details might be useful.
As usual, Councilmember Roberts, your sort of systems thinking is well received. I think that you know, staff, if you have a response to that, would be all ears, but I would imagine that you spend a lot of time talking about how coordinating infrastructure investments downstream as big ones come online is something that we're working on.
I would just add one last thing to build on that, is that the approach that we're taking is to really look, we call it M3, sorry for the acronym, but multi-agency, discipline, and multimodal. So multi-agency, multimodal, multidiscipline, and that means looking at it from a planner and an engineer perspective, as well as bicycle, pedestrian, transit investments. How do we keep freight moving? And we can't do it as one agency. We all need to work together, like Kelly said, to get the greatest bang for our efforts.
Councilmember Balducci.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Hi, Robin. In the report here, you talk about the 4 or 5 different priority policy work programs, and I-5 is obviously a huge one, but there's also a note about reviewing the HOV lanes policy, seismic preparedness and retrofit of state facility bridges, and planning for local priority state route projects beyond those funded in Connecting Washington. I wonder if somebody could just give a little bit of an update about how, because those are all also very big and impactful things. I'd love to know how WSDOT's going to go about working on those items, if you have any info.
Yeah. I think what we're doing in terms of, so yeah, again, seismic maintenance preservation, the HOV system, operational improvements, those pieces, and then the 5th piece, you're tracking well, is the piece that we're also talking about, which has to do with other than I-5. And so the 4 other pieces really are the foundation that go into the work that we're doing right now in the visioning and identifying. So we've done in the State Facilities Action Plan basically here's where we are today, here's the need, here's the funding we have, and here's gaps if they are out there, and how do we understand that and start to raise awareness about that and move that forward in this visioning process, and that's what we want to do. We'll be carrying as much as we can in terms of data. Kelly talked about, we have a lot of data that can help support those same themes. And just one last comment I'll make is that statewide, our WSDOT plan is to use this as a model, the State Facilities Action Plan, in other regions across the state, and look at how do we get a sense on the infrastructure and the mobility and other needs of the state facilities in partnership with the communities that they serve. I hope that helped a little bit. So it's really a basis of the work we're doing right now. It's data to go in. We felt like we had a pretty good handle on what's going on with the seismic and maintenance and preservation, for example, in terms of the need, and that information then can go into the specific corridor studies as we take them up.
So, well, let me just pick one of these things. Is this not, maybe I'm reading too much into this statement, but it looks like it's a statewide review of the HOV lanes policy, for one thing. That's a discrete question. Is that 2, 3, enforcement, hot lanes? What, I don't know. This strikes me as meaty, but it's not unpacked.
Yeah, and we want to unpack it. Actually, in Central Puget Sound, we really want to look at what's the best way to use that facility. And so that's part of what we want to do with this effort. It's not just about I-5. We really want to also explore the HOV functionality and what are the options for the best utility of that infrastructure.
Okay, I'm a little unclear about how much of this is I-5 focused and how much of it is Puget Sound focused and how much of it is statewide focused. And I just want to make sure that there's opportunities for input from folks who might not be directly on the I-5 group on issues that are very much impacting or helping potentially other areas.
Yeah, and I will say that we are also, this past fall, I was both in front of the House Transportation Committee and the Senate Transportation Committee with our Chief Engineer, John Nisbet, to report on the work that we're doing in this process. And we're going to continue going back and talking about the conversations that are underway. We're not going to do anything without having community impact and discussion about the HOV system. There's a lot more. This is just a very early beginning of a conversation.
Okay. Maybe we can follow up because I don't understand what the plan is.
Yeah, well, right now, we're really at the early stages of what a vision would be, and so moving through the conversation I think we have several years before we get somewhere where something's radically going to change.
Okay, thank you.
We are all sensing your dissatisfaction, Councilmember Balducci. And so I think a conversation best had between you and WSDOT staff. Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McGorty and Ms. Mayhew, for the presentation. I'm really excited about the start of this work plan, and I really appreciate DOT convening such a broad coalition of stakeholders to look at this issue. I have a couple comments and then a question. I think the focus on capacity and delay is important because it impacts not just SOVs, but HOVs, transit, freight, rideshare, van pool, all of which are part of having the multimodal system. And so I think that that's really important. And making sure that I-5 works well, make sure that everything connected to it, including surface streets, works better. And so I really very much appreciate your discussion and approach of looking at the travel shed. That's a much more holistic way that I think is really good for long-range planning. To that end, Bellevue, of course, is very interested in I-5 working well. 405 connects to it on two ends, and the two bridges that connect to it also connect to Bellevue. Bellevue is very interested in making sure that we do have the points of the 405 master plan that connect to I-5 is making sure that we have HOV connections both north and south for the HOV lanes, as well as that will help facilitate the Metro Rapid Ride that connects 405 and I-5. So I just wanted to get that in there, that's something that's a strong interest to us. It's also part of the adopted 405 master plan. My question is whether this work will at all touch on the autonomous vehicle and the future tech that I know, for example, there's not just the autonomous vehicle, but the I-5 charging station for electric vehicles. There's a lot of technological transportation issues that are coming to the forefront in these days. Are you looking at that at all? Thank you.
And that's the beauty of a visioning discussion, is that we can really kind of cast a wide net of what are the opportunities, and that autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles and different ride share and technology in the future, there's so many, as well as electric vehicle charging stations, there's so many opportunities. We want to make sure we vet those and look for ways to, as we move into scenario analysis, build different scenarios that have pieces of all of that. Another thing that we're thinking about is, I mentioned near term and I kind of mentioned long term, but what we're trying to do from a temporal standpoint, if you will, is to look at near term, maybe 0 to 4 years, and then the midterm out to something like 2035. But from there out to 2050, because now that's where our region is starting to go in the visioning conversations, there's that piece of we have to be honest and say we know some things are going to be extremely different than today, but we don't exactly know what they are, and try to assemble to the best of our understanding what are the factors, what are the trends, and where could we be, and what are other forward-thinking metro areas globally doing to manage their systems, provide multimodal choices, and moving freight, supporting communities best they can. And so we're trying to bring in case studies and look at all of those pieces in the visioning work that we're doing now.
Mayor Lucas.
Thank you, Robin. Good to see you. You said something, and I'm going to do some comments and then ask you a question. So in 2015, when they passed the transportation package, it was supposed to be from 2015 to 2030. So the next period of time would be, if it's the same metric, 2030, 2045. So already those programs have come to TIB for money for 5 projects, of which 2 received money. There are 3 Connecting Washington projects in the PSRC regional and so forth. But your comment was something that agencies were looking for projects that weren't included in that $15 billion package. How does that play into this? And is that something that the discussion was, we're going to do something about those sooner than 2030 as another state package?
I'll start.
Still good to see you. Thanks.
It's still good to see you too. So I can't promise that there's going to be additional dollars that happen outside of the timeframes that they're already programmed for. But what we're talking about is what's the mechanism, and I think it was actually this body that asked us to look at how we do business in terms of identifying projects that weren't on that, in that funding package in the future beyond Connecting Washington, and further look how we coordinate our metrics, our performance process. So that's simply what staff is trying to do, and put this in front of you as much as possible to get the direction that we need. Try not to get into the weeds too much, to help you look for a mechanism to move forward with potential funding packages. So that's what this process that actually Kelly kicked off in conversation is about.
That's right, it's my fault. I would just elaborate, I think, too. We know that funding is always kind of that end result, and I think partly that was a recognition of Connecting Washington was a very large package. It did a lot, but there's still a lot of needs out there. And so rather than, 5 different lists coming out there, let's take a step back, work together, and come up with an agreed upon list of investments, and then work together on whatever funding opportunities there might be. It could be legislature, it could be federal grants, it could be PSRC, TIB, but really speaking with that one voice and identifying those lists of needed investments so we don't have those kind of competing different lists, state and local.
Councilmember Nelson, you want to take us home?
Sure, because it's all positive what I have to say. I think speaking from the nether regions of far north, this excites me, because what I like about it is I sit and listen is I feel like I'm envisioning layer upon layer of how we look at our regional system. So, of course, I'm thinking transit, and no, the train's not going to get up to Arlington, but it's going to get to Everett. I need my people from North Snohomish County to be able to safely get to those systems, and I have lots of gaps on our state routes that go east and west that connect with that spine, and so this to me sounds like a wonderful way for we communities that are on the edges to be able to communicate what those needs are to safely move our people, hopefully not in single cars, but in a myriad of ways. And so I'm just really excited also to see the coming together of these groups. I've lived in Snohomish County my whole life, all my years. And I was just telling my husband this morning as we were carpooling down here together, I said, I can see, I've been on our council for 7 years and grew up in a very politically aware family, and I've seen a cohesiveness occurring over the last 10 or so years in our region. And it makes me happy to see that. I wish it could have happened 15, 20 years ago, but it didn't. And so I feel like this is part of that cohesiveness. And it just excites me for my region. I love Washington State. I love this area. And we're growing and we're changing. And, I tell my NIMBYs up in Arlington, get used to it. Sorry, it's the way it is. And so I feel like this is a tool that you're bringing forward to us to really just help us make the best for the healthy living for our community. So I'm excited about it. Thank you.
No one should dare to follow that. Councilmember Nelson, thank you for that rah-rah moment. Robin, Kelly, anything you'd like to add and wrap up? Okay. Thank you very much. Always nice to have alumni back. Welcome, Ben Bekenta, to talk to us about Vision 2050.
Yes, and early. We can get out of here early probably this morning. So good morning, everybody. So as you were so busy last year dealing with the regional transportation plan, we haven't been able to come and give you a briefing on the plans for updating the region's growth management plan. Right now, Vision 2040, we're going to be extending it out to the year 2050. So that process really kicked off mid last year, early last summer, with the executive board authorizing staff and the Growth Management Policy Board to do some early work to get ready for the update. This is the general work program. We intend to, the schedule calls for adoption of Vision 2050 in the year 2020, and that's for a variety of reasons. One, the next regional transportation plan needs to be adopted in 2022. So we need some new land use inputs. We need some new assumptions about growth in the region to support that plan, as well as the next round, believe it or not, of local comprehensive plans. We're thinking ahead. 2023, 2024 are the required updates of those local plans. So we have to get ahead of all of those local and regional planning efforts. So the early work that we've been pursuing has really focused on, there are a lot of new board members on the Growth Management Policy Board, new staff, so reviewing what's in Vision 2040, understanding the policy areas, what the regional growth strategy is all about, and also identifying and talking about the major changes that have happened since Vision 2040's adoption in 2008. So think about, we adopted that plan in April, May of 2008. Just a short year later, Sound Transit opened. So this plan was developed before high-capacity transit had really been implemented in the region, let alone the ST2 vote happened at I believe it was a fall vote, yes it was, in 2008. Of course, Sound Transit 3, Move Seattle, ballot measures in Kitsap County, Snohomish County, Pierce County to extend transit. I mean, a lot has changed. Growth has obviously really taken off since, as we've emerged from the recession. We look around the region and see tremendous growth, not only in Seattle, but in new town centers throughout the region, Renton and Kenmore and Bothell, and tremendous growth happening in Tacoma and southwest Snohomish County. So understanding where growth has happened and how that's lined up with the regional growth strategy and the vision that we had established back in 2008 is something the Growth Management Policy Board has been giving some attention to. And then, of course, we had to do some work with a consultant to actually develop the growth assumptions that we'll be using. So the population, household, and employment forecasts through the year 2050 that will form the basis for the land use planning that we do. So all that work has been happening since last June, and it culminated with kicking off a formal scoping process under SEPA, and that began in early February and concluded March 19th. During that time, we went out and held 5 listening sessions, and these point markers identify areas where people listed where their home zip code was. But we had 2 listening sessions in King County, 1 in Snohomish County, 1 in Pierce County, 1 in Kitsap County. And then we also, in the scoping period, received a number of letters from individuals, joint letters from jurisdictions and different types of groups, letters from 23 of our member jurisdictions, and then other organizations and agencies. And we then spent some time over the last month or two delineating those comments. You're familiar with this. We did it as part of the Regional Transportation Plan. And so you can see we were pretty happy that about a third of the comments came from organizations and agencies, about a third from individuals, 40%, and then from individual jurisdictions, and then about half and half in terms of comments that we collected from those listening sessions in person, and then the written comments. Looking at the big topics within those comments, so from the written comments, the biggest 3, or the top 3 mentions here were the regional growth strategy itself. Is it working? Does it need refinement? There was support for it. There were some questions about our ability to implement it in the way we would like to. A lot of questions about transportation. Are we effectively leveraging transportation investments in the way that we grow? And then housing. And we'll get to some more on housing and some public opinion on that in a bit. But those were the top 3 topics in the written comments. I should also note that topics were coded with a couple of different categories. So sometimes we would get a comment about transportation that really had some land use implications or growth strategy implications. So we were able to code those comments with multiple topics so we can sort and really see what people are thinking and what's of real concern to them. Key issues along those lines, big common themes are, again, the regional growth strategy and development patterns, the opportunities for transportation-oriented or transit-oriented development, the real importance of jobs housing balance throughout the region. With the tremendous employment growth in King County and South Snohomish County, there's a widespread recognition of the need to make sure that all parts of our region are growing and that we can minimize the distances between homes and jobs and provide that economic opportunity throughout the region. A number of comments about social equity and displacement, and that the plan needs to tackle and address those topics front on. And then again, some questions about climate change and resilience. And then while they didn't appear as frequently, there were a number of other topics, as you can imagine, came up in such an open-ended type of question that we posed in the scoping period, which is what should the region focus on as we update our plan. You can see there were a number of mentions of the need for a cohesive regional vision, again, prosperity across the region, coming up with financial strategies and approaches for local jurisdictions in particular to fund needed infrastructure beyond transportation to support growth. And then, again, how do we leverage these massive and really foundational regional investments that the region is making?
And can you pause for a second?
Sure can.
Mayor Lucas.
Thanks. Could you go back one slide, please?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So at the bottom is TOD, equity, social justice, climate change, and so forth. And now would you go to the slide you just had on?
Mm-hmm.
How do they rise to common themes?
These were just the written comments, or about half of them were. So we wanted to be able to look at what we got in writing, and then what we heard from people in the listening sessions. So on the pie on my right-hand side, so the left-hand side of the screen, you can see about half and half of comments from the listening sessions over the conversations that we had. And there were, in those, I participated in several of them, there were a number of long conversations about climate, the environment, resiliency, the importance of TOD, our center's framework.
Okay.
So it was really that split. So I'll shift gears a little bit. As part of the scoping period, we also just conducted in March a public opinion survey. So it was a statistically valid survey, 2,000 respondents from across the region. So we were able to do some crosstabs at the county level as well. We're still processing all of the results that we got, but you may have seen this week some of the survey results were in the Seattle Times. And the intention was to go out and hear from people just more broadly across the region what their attitudes and opinions about growth are, and what issues maybe we should be focusing on in Vision 2050. So it's a scientifically valid survey. One thing, we made it available this time. It was also available in Spanish and Mandarin Chinese. And we, with the conclusion of this, a consultant administered this survey for us. We also have had it translated into 5 languages, which are available online, which we're pushing out, and we'll continue to do so for the next 4 or 5 months or so. And those are, the other languages are Tagalog, Korean, Vietnamese, Mandarin Chinese, and Spanish. So we're trying to hear from as many people as possible through this survey. So one question, I'm just going to review a couple of the findings from the survey, and the full survey is available on our website. It was presented to the Growth Management Policy Board last week, and there are a number of crosstabs in the full survey. Councilmember Balducci found my favorite takeaway from this one, which is that 95% of the people of the region did not cite the people as something they liked best about this region. But when you add up, I was just in New Orleans for a conference, and everyone talked about, wow, the people are so awesome and so much fun, and that's not the case here, I guess. But the top 3 categories that people selected had to do with the environment, outdoor recreational opportunities, just the natural setting of the Central Puget Sound as being what they really, really love about this region. And you can see other, of course, economic opportunity and just quality of life sort of related topics came up as well. Conversely, when asked what they liked least about the region, cost of living and homelessness emerged as the the top two categories. And interestingly, so we deliberately repeated a number of questions that we asked in a very similar survey that we conducted to support the Vision 2040 planning process. So back from 2003, we did a region-wide survey, and cost of living and homelessness didn't even show up in the top 10 categories of responses back then. It was a very different environment. At that time, transportation and job creation were really the top two topics in the early 2000s, and it makes some sense. We just were reeling from the dot-com bust. We really hadn't taken these big leaps forward in transportation funding with even the nickel package and, of course, connecting Washington and the Sound Transit votes and other transit measures. But so today, transit and transportation is still, for 10% of the respondents, is a big concern. But the top two are those costs of living and sort of housing related topics. And drilling down a little bit more, and of course we have, as I mentioned before, we have county level data for all of these responses that we can delve into. But when we asked just an open-ended question of, for you personally, how easy or difficult is it for you to access housing, reliable transportation, or good employment opportunities, so I should note that's affordable housing, nearly 60% said it was either difficult or very difficult to access affordable housing or housing that's affordable to them. About a quarter cited reliable transportation choices and 20% employment opportunities. So clearly, accessing affordable housing is a primary concern throughout the region. Also asking about working together on regional growth issues, a regional growth strategy. Over 2/3 felt that working together was a very important thing for the region to do, to carry out an overall regional growth strategy and develop one for the Central Puget Sound region. So some validation that people feel that it's important to do this work together. So moving ahead, and that was just a couple of data points. Again, much more is available on our website. The work plan ahead is this spring and summer. Next month, our Growth Management Policy Board is scheduled to adopt the scoping report, which lays out the basic assumptions and scope of work for the project and schedule. But in the meantime, we will, with that, and then moving forward through this summer, we're holding some work sessions, beginning to hold work sessions on looking at options for the regional growth strategy. There are some workshops on housing, doing analysis and engagement sessions with the board like you all did during the development of the regional transportation plan, focusing in on particular issues and how might those change in the Vision 2050 document. The idea is to have some refinements, possible refinements, alternatives for refinements for the regional growth strategy identified by the end of the year, to prepare us to issue a draft environmental impact statement in the February-March timeframe of 2019. That would be followed by working toward releasing a draft Vision 2050 document in the early summer of 2019, having a comment period, and then working toward the final version of an updated Vision 2050 document by the end of 2019, where it would then move into the executive board review process for adoption by General Assembly in 2020. So that's the pretty ambitious schedule. There's a lot to cover, but we took some heart from the really efficient way that you all were able to review the regional transportation plan, and in a year's time, tackle some pretty important issues and offer policy guidance for how to update that in the region's plan. You did that in a year, so we're going to take 2 for the regional vision plan. Again, upcoming work, June 7th, Growth Management Policy Board will have an extended meeting focusing on the regional growth strategy, really digging down into how trends look compared to the strategy itself. They've done some of that to date, but also looking at regional geographies, looking at the purpose of the regional growth strategy, looking at the core principles that underlie it. They will also have in July an extended meeting on housing. And then wanted to note that we will, of course, be coming to you periodically to update you as major milestones are reached. But also, as Kelly mentioned on an earlier agenda item, a big thing will be looking at the transportation or potential stresses on the transportation network, which we've defined through 2040. You know, what happens without an additional decade of growth from 2040 to 2050? Are there particular parts of the region that will really need to be addressed? And while the Vision 2050 document won't propose the specific solutions, it'll set up the work for the next version of the Regional Transportation Plan that'll be adopted in 2022. So as we start on that work, we'll certainly involve various subcommittees of this body, but also keep you informed about how things are shaping up in the Vision 2050 document. And with that, that's all I had today. Happy to take any questions about the overall process or any next steps that we may be starting on.
Not seeing any, Ben. Not surprising, though, that a lot of elected officials around the room taking pictures of polling data.
Yeah.
So a lot of interest around that. And additional research, I think, if you're interested, it is a very voluminous document. So take a read through. There's a lot of interesting stuff.
The full slide deck is posted on the Growth Management Policy Board Committee website. So it's all there ready for you.
Councilmember Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to talk to you about the, first of all, I know we need to do this. The region's growing very quickly. Most of the growth in Snohomish County is actually occurring in my district, so I have a keen interest in this. When you're talking about the scoping and whatnot, that's really important, and I'm not sure everybody fully understands how important that is. Could you just kind of talk about the things that are being handled in the scoping?
Sure.
Because I want to make sure that we don't rush into that.
Sure, absolutely. I did skip over that a bit. So the scoping document, and it's not terribly long. It's about, was it included in the packet? I forget if it was. But it identifies some core assumptions that will frame the update of the plan. So one that we intend to do a supplemental EIS, building on the wide variety of alternatives that were evaluated in the development of the Vision 2040 plan. So that looked at 5 different growth scenarios, from very dispersed to very, very concentrated and mixes in between. And so the scoping document identifies that we'll be building the environmental review on that environmental impact statement. It establishes the growth assumptions that we'll be using, namely the 2050 population, employment, and housing forecasts. It summarizes the topics that I reviewed that we heard in the scoping period. So both from the listening sessions as well as the written comments. So the major topical areas that are of prime concern in the update, things like housing, technology, transportation, economic opportunity, and so forth. There are a number of topics identified that the plan will, that our work on updating the plan will address. It establishes the schedule and some more technical sort of pieces to meet our SEPA requirements. But this does kind of provide the game plan of what we'll be looking at and what we won't be looking at. And so it's the document that really governs the development of the more detailed work plan.
Okay, and I'm assuming part of that would be land supply for the housing.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember Balducci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is really interesting stuff. I mean, I think the advent of housing being at the top of the list is echoed in some of the city surveys that I know Councilmember Robertson and I are really familiar with from Bellevue. It used to be public safety and transportation, transportation and public safety, 1 and 2 every year, but housing has crept up onto that list because it's such a huge thing. One question and one comment. Yesterday, just randomly, somebody sent me a link to this survey, so I went on and I took it.
Oh,
It was very interesting. But is it still open? Because you're reporting data, and it accepted my comments last night.
It's a little confusing because the statistically valid, regionally statistically valid survey is completed. Okay. So that's what we're reporting on. But it's still open and we're keeping the responses in this currently open period for folks that would like to complete it. And so we'll, that way we can really push to certain communities, certain parts of the region. We're working with partners to target certain parts of the region. And so we'll be collecting all of that and reporting along that alongside the region-wide sample as well. Yeah.
And then my comment is, when jobs and housing balance comes up these days, I always have the same thought, and the thought is the way we do comprehensive planning, we have jobs targets and we have housing targets, and we don't talk a whole lot about how these things match up. So if you have nothing but very expensive high-end housing in a certain geography, but you've got jobs that go from minimum wage up to Bill Gates, just for example, then you've got a problem. Our plan isn't serving us well because you don't have the housing you need where you need it. And I think that that's something, as we think about the long-range plan, we need to engage with that somehow. I don't know exactly how. It's a hard thing to think about, but I think we do need to talk about it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Dar.
Thank you for your presentation. I had a question. I don't know if it's a chicken and egg thing, and I guess I'm wondering, this is the first time I'll have been through this process. Do we tie infrastructure to growth, or do we tie growth to infrastructure?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. I think we try to do both. We look at areas that are showing certain needs and try to direct infrastructure to meet those needs, but also there are, as you may be aware, there are areas that don't have infrastructure today that we anticipate that will be a growth area, and we need to bring infrastructure in order to support future growth. So it's jurisdictions do both, I think. And when we look at the region-wide system, with transportation specifically, a plan for growth can look out beyond current infrastructure and current capacity, and then provide those that, a framework that the more detailed planning can pursue. So for example, back in 1990, the first vision document, Vision 2020, that the region adopted, first adopted in 1995 as our region's multi-county planning policies, it called for something that hadn't even been adopted yet, a regional transportation authority to create a high-capacity transit system to serve the region. And in 1996, the RTA was passed, which became Sound Transit. So sometimes these vision plans have to look out far beyond existing infrastructure and imagine what infrastructure might be necessary. And then sometimes the plans are more specific about infrastructure serving existing populations and needs.
I guess I would argue
both.
I would argue for more planning growth around current infrastructure. And the reason I say that is County Executive Summers had a workshop a couple months ago with various electeds and staff from Snohomish County, and we went through the process of we had dots that were worth 25,000 people, 50,000 people, and we were asked, our table groups, to place them on the map. And I think without exception, most tables chose to put the growth along where we expect the light rail to Everett to go. And I'm just curious, because in Bothell we have a lot of growth and not the infrastructure. And it seems to me there are a lot of areas that have great infrastructure, and transit in particular, that could be accepting more growth. And so I just kind of wondered how that worked.
Yeah, absolutely. We've heard precisely that comment loud and clear through the scoping process. That's something that needs to be considered as part of the Vision 2050 plan. Yeah.
Mr. Hamashima?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ben, one thing really intriguing about the presentation is that you put up a slide, I guess, back then. It says, in 2003, respondents also were concerned that planning was on the wrong track. And then it says that 60% of people said, when it comes to planning for future transportation needs, 60% said that we're on the wrong track. Do you see this as being somehow changing the method or trajectory, or trying to figure out as to what people were saying there?
So you're talking about the 2003 survey?
Yeah.
I'd have to ask our consultant who actually did the 2003 and really compare the phrasing of the questions to see if there was something fundamentally different. Offhand, I can't say exactly what would account for that difference in that particular response.
It just seems to be such an open question, and I can't imagine as to how you would interpret it and what would you do with it. I was just curious as to what happened from there, that's all.
Yeah, I can follow up with you, Jesse.
Representative Gregerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It sounds like we've done this work around Vision 2040, and now we're moving into the 2050. Will there be a sidestep at all to look at sounds severely different between the planning and the vision of what it was back in 2008 or earlier and today. Will there be a moment in time when we'll be able to experience what you're seeing, how it's so different than what we anticipated, what some suggested solutions would be just in the moment, not just only into the future? Because I think that's part of where we struggle around where are we at today, what decisions could we be making today, along with honoring the work that you're shepherding.
Sure. No, it's a good question. Well, I did mention that the Growth Management Policy Board has been looking at trends actual growth trends compared to what the vision had established as a goal, and looking at differences between them. One thing to remember, I think, is that when the overall forecast for the 40-year period, 2000 through 2040, that was the assumption underlying Vision 2040, was for growth of 1.7 million people and about 1.2 million jobs. Our current 2050 forecast from 2018 through 2050, so a slightly shorter period of time, is 1.8 million people, 1.2 million jobs. So essentially, we're experiencing right now the growth that we anticipated in the early to mid 2000s as we were planning for growth. It's just all happening. We also had experienced a lull period through the recession where there wasn't a lot happening, and then with the emergence from the recession, we're dealing with growth at a rate that we really haven't seen in this region since the Alaska gold rush. And so it's an historic period of growth. We don't anticipate that will continue on the same rate year by year, but it's something just to acknowledge that what we thought would happen is happening. And so we're things like displacement, affordability weren't as big a concern in the early 2000s as we were developing the plan, and now we realize that's something that we wish we would have begun to address then. And it's something that will be, as I said, front and center as we move forward into this plan. So it's a good observation that we have to look at what's happening and how well that matches up with the plans that we have for our region.
Councilmember Crowley.
Just real quickly on the question methodology, it sounded like you're trying to compare and see if you present questions similarly last time to this time, and we see an open-ended question and then a whole bunch of answers, but are you also giving them suggested answers, or do they just pull this out of the air, or do you like have 12 things underneath there of these?
That's a great question. So for example, for the this question, this was an open-ended question and then of the respondents, so one, it was actually, so this was open-ended, and then so it was 29% of the respondents to that open-ended question cited this. This 29% wasn't the entire 2,000-person sample. There is another very similar question where we they had choices. I'm sorry? It's not in the
earlier in the
survey. You know, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
Because if they're packing a whole bunch of suggested ideas, and I get down to the next one, I'm just wondering if there's a little channeling accidentally going on there.
Sure, there could be. I can check to see whether that was prior to this open-ended or after. But that one had a similar result where it was about the same breakdown in terms of cost of housing, cost of living was the highest choice. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for a lively discussion today. We'll have lots of opportunities to continue to bring Ben back as a guest star for future Transportation Policy Board meetings. We are not back together again until June the 7th, but there is a little bit of a meeting in between now and then. That's the May 31st General Assembly that I hope you've all registered for. When we're back together on the 7th, we're going to have a couple of topics in front of us related to bike and pedestrian infrastructure stuff. And our hope is that for some of the meetings that we've got moving forward over the next couple of months, that we can do some kind of modal specific discussions and highlight some opportunities for us to think about innovations that are happening in all parts of the region and give local governments a chance to kind of showcase some of the good work that they're doing. One of the things that we've talked about in this body before, for example, is the variety of different approaches local governments have taken to complete streets ordinances. So, thinking through how we could all learn from each other, share with each other, and kind of highlight the good work that's going on throughout the region. How did I do on that, Kelly? Okay. Any further thoughts or questions for the good of the order? Well, an unprogrammed 28 minutes is in your future. Use it wisely, colleagues, and we'll see you back again in June. We're adjourned.